If your brain is bored, it's more creative. When your brain is occupied, it's useless. Netflix is a jackpot. It's like playing the lotto. When I went to Germany, I remember asking this one guy, what challenges are you facing as a composer? And he surprised me and said, look, I'm trying to get better. I'm like, bruh, how's that your problem? Like, we've got bigger problems here. We're trying to get work. So I've been making music for 20 years, been film scoring for 16 years. And obviously, it's a big jump and a big transition. There is a very substantial difference between the two aspects, all right? Like, when you're an artist, you're mostly focused on what's happening in front of you in the studio from 0 to 3 minutes into the track, and it's speaking towards whatever it is you're feeling, what you're going for, whatever. And then you've got artists that are kind of like motivated by different things. Some want to be famous and want bitches and money. Some really just want to have space to express themselves and stuff like that. And some are really just wanting to put their, whatever they're feeling down. These are all different things. And whatever your motivation is, you know why you're doing it. You know where you're going to end up. And I'm not really here to kind of shift you or anything like that. My job here is to kind of put things into perspective as to how things get to where they get to in certain instances. Now, terms and conditions are this. I can only tell you my journey and how I got here. And I can only tell you how I would do it. You still have to go out and do your research. I think some of you, maybe you guys have done a little background check on who I am, what I've done and all that stuff. And, you know, I don't want to do too much name dropping or anything like that. That's not why I'm here. You guys are not here to see how cool I am in real life. But for context, to show you that, just to give you, put you at ease, I've done work with Disney, Netflix, Acorn in the UK. I've done films in Australia, US, South Africa. I've won awards in Kenya. How do you get your music on Netflix? Netflix is a jackpot. It's like playing the lotto. I'll speak to the artists first, mainly. You don't make music to get it onto Netflix. It kind of doesn't work like that. You make music for particular reasons that put you in a position where people from Netflix then look at you and say, we want this song. Now you have to understand how music actually works and what music actually does. When you make a piece of music, it's great, it's whatever, sharp. Then you put your piece of music out there. Two things happen. If it reaches maybe 100,000 people, it will act as a snapshot in those people's lives. It will remind them of something. This piece of music kind of reminds me of the first time I got laid, or the first time when this was playing in the back when I was getting robbed, or whatever the case may be. It has that kind of snapshot. Say it goes a little bit further and it actually gets into radio and actually really blows up. And then it starts to have a bigger footprint in people's lives, right? Now it's playing everywhere and more people have more memories based on this piece of music. Then it'll go even a step further where everyone is playing it, everyone is talking about it. But then it takes a snapshot of that time in general, that year, sometimes that decade. So there's different levels to where your music is actually sitting on the spectrum. And where it sits on the spectrum makes it a better chance for it to be chosen for particular reasons. Because now when we shift into the film side, they're making a song about Lebo Matos, a movie about Lebo Matos, a series. They want you to, the people who are that age, whoever was young at 1999 or 1995 or whatever, that when you play a particular song, you immediately know which time we're talking to because you can remember it. And that's what the music is playing a snapshot of, that particular time. Then Netflix will be like, okay, what were the biggest songs in that time where people won't have a hard time to remember that was the time and that was the essence. Then your songs get picked like that. Let's go back to the beginning. Now, when you're making your song, to get to the point where it's a snapshot, you have to understand a certain philosophy and a certain way of thinking. Your music has to be exceptional. You have to take the Netflix and the money and all that fame stuff and put it far away and focus on being so good and so exceptional at your work that that stuff is not stuff that you have to work towards. It just comes to you. That's your only focus. That's the only thing you need to think about is I've made a track it's nice to me, but how good is it really? So you step away from it and you listen to it again in 10 days and you actually immediately start to see everything that's wrong with it. Don't release it. Go back. This thing of producers, when I used to do it when I was young, I won't even blame anyone, but like we used to have this thing where like, yo man, I made this beat in 10 minutes and think that like you're special and you're great because you made like a banger in 10 minutes. And to be honest, you didn't. You made something that took 10 minutes to make. Is it really great if it took 10 minutes to make? Probably not. And the thing that film scoring will teach you is that you have to be patient. You have to go back and revisit, leave it, carry on doing other things, come back and re-listen to it over and over again and keep improving it wherever you can. So that you get to a point where you're like, there's really not much else I can give to this. It's at the best that it can be. But even then, you must know that you're only at 5% of your true potential. And you still have to travel the road of being 20% at your true potential, 50%, 70%, or whatever. And you know what? That stuff doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. So it means every single day having the discipline of doing the same thing over and over and doing it to a point where you have no other choice but to improve. I remember when I went to Germany for the film festival, Berlinale Film Festival, there were other composers there. And I remember asking this one guy, I said to him, look, what challenges are you facing wherever you come from? I think he was from Canada or something. And I'm like, what issues, what challenges are you facing as a composer, where you are? What are your issues? And he surprised me and said, look, I'm trying to get better. I'm like, bruh, how's that your problem? That can't be your problem. Like, we've got bigger problems here. We're trying to get work. You know, there's a moment as an artist where you're like, I want to do this kind of music. I want to make music for this type of movie and it must sound like this. And it sits there and it starts boiling. And then eventually you get the chance to do it. It all comes out, right? Now it's done. Now you can't go back and do the same thing. Now you actually have to do something new. You have to do something that people haven't heard before. That's where you start to see how good you actually are, because now you're faced with a problem that you weren't faced with before. Now you have to really deal with the shit of like getting better. Then it started to click. Years later, what that guy was saying in Berlin, he was like, I've made all the beats I could make. Literally made all the types of scores that I could make. I can't go back, because going back is not growing and evolving. That point of evolution, the hardest part is, how do I get better? How do I take what I've done now and reduce it to 20% and grow back up to 70%? Now you have to kind of like look to the stars and look to shit that you haven't heard before, look to other things. Because getting better is probably the most important aspect of every single thing that we do. Because if you don't get better, no one will ever look at you. When you listen to a person's album, if it sounds like the previous album that they just did a rendition of, you're not going to be interested. You want to see what more they have. And that's why some people stick to artists. So the point I'm trying to make is getting better is the thing that makes you competitively ahead. It puts you ahead of anything and everyone else. And that's not what people are paying attention to. Fame is nice, but it's a drug. It's a problem. And people sometimes pay too much attention on fame because of what they think it gives you, but it actually ends up taking more away from you. This is not me trying to say don't want to be famous. Just think about the drug that you're taking. It's a very, very quiet drug. It's like sugar. Nobody knows how terrible sugar is. You have to know, and you have to build an immune system for it, and you have to build a coping mechanism for it, because it usually ends up coming into the mix and it makes you complacent. People will make you believe that you are a god and that you can't fall. And then the minute they walk away from you, you realize you weren't and you have to kind of think about what it does to your creative process. It's done that to me as well, but not necessarily fame. Money does the same thing. I got inebriated by having certain amount of money that I stopped being creative. I always had enough money to distract me from the things I was supposed to be doing. So I wasn't sitting there making music anymore or trying to figure out new ways to do things. I was just sitting there watching YouTube, enjoying good time, going out shopping, any moment I was entertained, and it took away from my creative process. Those little things that I'm really referencing are things that end up taking away from where you want to go and what you're trying to do. Let's get back to the question. How do you get your music onto Netflix? You become exceptional in a way that no one could ever ignore you. Your music must just hit social media and be so exceptional that people will naturally share it on their own. Not to say don't promote. You have to. But people will just be like, yo, this is dope, and start sharing it on their own, and it goes viral on its own. That's how exceptional you need to be. Now I'm going to speak to the composers, people who are actually making music specifically for film. They actually don't want to be famous most of the time. They want to be in the back. If you end up being famous, it's a byproduct of, again, being exceptional. But it's not something that you're looking forward to, and it's not something that you're chasing after. Film scoring is a completely different animal to making normal music, and I'll tell you what the difference is. Everyone is a composer, technically. You're composing, you're creating music out of nothing. You've got 12 notes to f*** around with, and that's all you really have to play with. And those 12 notes, the rendition between those 12 notes, from the time music started up until now, has put us in a position where it's even harder to make music now. Because chances are you're going to have the same series of notes that have been done before. It's a problem. So it's a lot harder. But the reason we get royalties is because we are creating IP. You're creating something from nothing. You're writing. That's why a lot of actors don't get royalties, because they just perform what's already been written. When you're composing music as an artist, you're thinking about yourself. What do I feel like today? What do I want to make? What am I doing? I've had this idea, so I'm going to put this beat down, and I think this goes towards this feeling. It feels a little bit like a sad love song, whatever, and so that's what I'm going to do. And then you do that. You only have yourself to be accountable to. Even worse today, you can have an album full of and still put it out on Spotify and all of that stuff. It's that much easier today. And then they call it artistic impression or artistic what. You know, you can do whatever you want. You're not accountable to anyone. You are literally a single cell that's just roaming around doing its own thing, whatever. When you're making music for a film, you are a system within a system. You have a lot of people to be accountable for, and you're playing a very, very specific role. So a lot of the things that motivate you here, emotions, self-expression or whatever, them being the subject this side, they are a tool this side. This side is the subject, is the thing that gets you going. On this side, it's something you can tap into to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. You are more accountable to your director. You're more accountable to the film in general. And it's about you, but it's not about you in the same time. And I'll explain what I mean by that. It's not about you because you don't sit there and say, I made this amazing track and therefore they should accept it as it is. It's about what works for the film and does it help to carry the story forth? And what role is it actually playing in the bigger picture of the film? Here's why it is about you. They hire you because they like your perspective on life and how that perspective makes its way into your music. How you actually musically express a certain idea. How you do it. You take the idea of Armageddon, and this is how it appears in your mind, and this is how it appears musically. That's why they choose you to come and score a particular film, because that expression is in line with the director's vision. And that's just to simplify it as much as I can. My process is very much deeper and more spiritual. In order for me to be completely truthful to the process, I will read the script and understand the world that the director's building. So my belief is whenever a director makes a movie, builds that world, he is doing one of two things. He's either opening a window to a world that actually does exist in a parallel universe. Quantum physics speaks to parallel universes, whereas there are infinite number of Earths, infinite number of people, infinite numbers of yous, all doing different things, have taken different decisions. So every time there's an opportunity to make a decision, like today, I could have not come here. There is a universe where I didn't come here. And then that universe follows that particular path. And the increments are minute, but millions of it. Somewhere, somehow, there is a universe where the movie is actually happening for real. Those characters, those people are actually, that is actually happening. That's my belief. So he's either opening that window or he's creating the universe where that is happening. So my job is to go to that universe spiritually, live there, and pull whatever's happening in that world and what it sounds like there. That's how I achieve a new sound and something that's different every single time, because no two worlds are the same. And so when I live there, I get a sense of what it feels like there. I breathe that air. I eat that food. I become one of those people that live there. And then I pull from that. That's the inspiration that I get. I bring it back here and I say, Mr. Director, this is what your film actually sounds like. They most of the time like it. Sometimes they don't. And if they don't, then that's what it is. Ultimately, the difference is that when you're a composer, you've got more, there's more you're accountable for. People sometimes think that what we do is just background music. And there is such a thing as background music. It's called library music. If somebody's looking for something that works, one, they can't afford a real composer, which is not a bad thing. It's okay. And two, they usually know specifically what they want. So they pull from a library and then they just put it in there because it works for whatever they want. And the thing is with directors, they're very insecure people because they're putting themselves out there. When you take your product and you put it there, it makes you insecure because now people are going to see it whichever way they want to see it, one. And two, you feel exposed. The one part that they're really exposed about is music because most of them don't know how to make music. There are some that can, but not to the extent that a composer can. 9 out of 10 times they don't really know what they want. It's hard for them to now let that part of themselves go because you never know what you're going to get from a composer, no matter what you think. If you go to Hans Zimmer right now, you don't know what he's going to come back with. And that's the scary part. And they have to now get married to that new idea that this composer's come with. And you don't want to have to go through that process 8 times with 8 different composers. You have to kind of create an environment where you say, look, this is going to work for all of us. It's going to work for you. And this is the best way to express what you're trying to say. You can see how much more dense film scoring is than making music. Don't get me wrong. It's not that one is greater than the other or one is more than the other. Look, man, on the last series I did, Classified, I had to score, but I also had to do a lot of commercial music. So I had to go back to the times when I was a producer / artist. Ultimately, film scoring needs you to understand psychology. You have to know people because you start to understand them on a deeper level. You have to understand world building. You start to pay attention to things that you wouldn't necessarily pay attention to. Looking at the majority brand that everybody's wearing here. Things like that. And then starting to get an idea of what are people thinking? How are they? Who's in the room? You start to notice all the colors. You start to notice every single thing because all of those details make it into your music because you're building a world when you're making film score. You have to be able to fit into every single aspect of the filmmaking process. And that's because you end up having to understand the characters in ways that you wouldn't normally understand them. I'll give you an example. I did a film called The Forgiven, and Eric Bana was playing the role of an apartheid serial killer. I had to become the serial killer, and I had to understand it. In a scary way, I had to be like, I get you. I understand why you would do that. Even though it was as up as a serial killer, you kind of have to understand him to that degree where you can be like, I'm sort of walking in your shoes. I wouldn't really do that myself, but I understand why you would do it. Now you understand the character well enough to be able to compose from their perspective. Because you have to be fair to characters. We don't make movies anymore where it's like plain and simple, good guy, bad guy. People are making more complex characters where it's like, what's his name? Black Panther? Killmonger. We all liked Killmonger than we did Black Panther. I'm pretty certain of that. We were all leaning more towards Killmonger than Black Panther. Even though his methods are questionable, but it was like it did appeal to the questionable aspect of ourselves. And so to compose from his perspective, you have to be honest and true about that and say, this is what he wants. This is why he wants it. And this is what his music sounds like. But it's not that simple that it's like, oh, make bad music. I mean, Killmonger's music was probably one of the reasons why Ludwig won the Oscar. Because it was so dope. It didn't sound too much like bad music, like bad people music. It just sounded like, yo, man, this is speaking to my dark side, you know? That's what makes film scoring so exceptional. There's so many different layers and so many different reasons. I mean, like, that's just the one aspect. You looking at the different perspectives, you composing from the 2 different characters. Then there's the perspective of composing from world music. Because there's this character's theme, there's this character's theme. Maybe you have themes for certain things. The bank robbery itself, because it's a key theme throughout the film, that will have its own theme. Because this bank robbery, this guy lost his brother. And so the rest of the film, he's dealing with the loss of his brother. So it becomes a constant theme throughout, because every moment he's down, or every moment he's thinking about it, or every moment the bank robbery is causing him to make a different decision, the theme comes. Then you've got world music. What does this world actually feel like? Away from all the other themes, if I just had to play this music, would you know what movie that is? That's the sonic identity of the film. I have a committee of about 4 or 5 people in my mind. They're sitting with me right now, trying to make sure that I cover all the bases, right? They help me come to the decision. I have those internal discussions every time. But one will say lead character, make the music for the lead character, and they'll be able to justify why they're saying that. And they'll say make music from the other character, the supporting character. And they'll justify why. Then they'll be like, no, don't make any music. Number 3 will say don't make any music here. Why? Because everything that's needed in the scene is already there. You can already feel the tension with whatever's happening. So film scoring is also knowing when not to make music. And then the other one will say the sonic identity of the whole thing, or whatever. Then it's like, how does this tie into the other scenes? That all of these puzzles that you're putting together is the things that you're thinking about when you're making music. You can immediately see now that, like, when you're sitting in a studio making music, the only puzzle you have is which instrument to use. Versus this side, you're like, not only do I have to think about the instruments to use, but like I have to think, okay, why am I doing this for what? And how does it speak to the scene that came before it and the scene that goes after? How does it work? And so you'll go through numbers of iterations, but it's ultimately a puzzle that you'll never finish solving, because you always run out of time. Always. If you finish your score in time, maybe it sucks. Okay, think about that for a second. Maybe it sucks. It's not supposed to be easy. Every film feels like you're doing this for the first time. You're not bringing experience. It's not like factory work. You know, some people write from being able to play the guitar, and sometimes they write from muscle memory, which means they're writing from something they've done before, which means it's not really that new. So you kind of have to forget, pick up a different instrument that you don't know, learn how to play that, and then write from that as an angle. All of these things are ways to get to that point of being exceptional.
Calling out all content creators, from artists to podcasters to any creator who uses any form of audio. You can now upload your very own audio clip from a song to a content clip and promote your work using the MTN Callertunez platform. The cherry on top is you can use the Callertunez to make some moolah, cash, pesos by getting your fam, friends, and fans to use your Callertunez, which will mean money in your pocket. So basically, every time someone listens to your Callertunez, likes it, they simply press any key from 1 to 9 to download it as their own, and that is a win for you too. You can submit your audio through AMP's very own distribution channel with MTN by sending it to the very email below. And of course, through Callertunez, you get access to the creative world of AMP Studios, with access to our resources from recording studios to podcasting equipment to events, networking sessions, and all of it. Get as creative as you want with MTN Callertunez and AMP Studios.
Let's say that you trying to compose for a certain scene in a project that you're working on.
Yeah.
But then you know that you can't get to what you're trying to, translate, and you know that there's certain music. Let's say you wanna maybe use a Zethu Mashika song, which is gonna be perfect, but you can't actually, compose it yourself, something similar. Okay. How do you get to then navigate where you want to use a specific song, but it's not licensed, and you can't actually compose that? How do you get to that? And then second question, what's your process? Let's say you write, like you've composed for films and documentary. What's the difference in your process in between those two sides of things?
We all have our heroes, right? People that we feel like will never, we're not quite at their potential yet. Sometimes these editors will find music and put it in there that works with the film. And that music will be your hero's music. That will put you behind your gate. You'll be like, I'm expected to do something that's equal to this or greater than. I don't know what the to do in that instance, because I've been there and all I did was try to not be infected by that feeling of imposter syndrome. And that's what that will do. It'll give you a high level of imposter syndrome where you actually don't know how to beat that. Then you have to kind of like make your way back and say, look, that was the editor's idea. It wasn't mine. And the director has to be okay with letting this go because they can't afford it. And if they can, that's the track that they should actually get. If the production can afford to bring in that Zethu Mashika track, let them bring in that track. But I'm going to say, I don't think that's a good idea. I think this is a better idea for what we're trying to do. And that's now that deep conversation that you have with the director and say, look, man, I'm not going to try and remake somebody else's track. For me personally, it's unethical because a lot of producers and directors want a cheaper version of something they can't afford. So they say, look, we want a Jay-Z track here, this Jay-Z track. You know you can't afford Jay-Z. Why are you asking for Jay-Z? And you want me to make a mimic version of a Jay-Z track. That's basically stealing from Jay-Z because I'm basically making a fake version of the real thing. And it's not necessarily ethical to want a composer to do something that does not sound like him. So they either need to find an artist that they can maybe, that does jazz music and pay them. But I'm a composer and I make music that goes towards this. No one goes to Pharrell and asks him for a Timbaland beat. In that instance, you come back to your gate by saying, look, this is what I can do and this is what I'm good at. And this is what I think is best for the film. And you then create whatever you feel fits the best for here. As to not being able to achieve that sound that you're trying to achieve, that means you actually driving with the headlights off. I don't think, and I'm not going to dictate as to what it should be. The music already exists before I put it out. I already know what it's going to sound like before I make it. I'm not trying to figure it out as I go, because then you're hoping to get lucky. Like my scoring process when I make music, it actually happens more outside of the studio than in the studio. When I'm driving, I drive in silence most of the time. When I'm walking around doing whatever, my brain is constantly making music. And that's where the music actually comes from. So when I'm stuck on a scene, I'll think about the scene and I'll stop and I'll take off. I'll actually take my shoes off and go walk in the garden for very particular reasons. When you walk on the ground, you get ionized, your blood vessels start to move better, you get electrically charged, and your brain and everything starts to work better. But you're also in touch. And then you leave your phone behind and force your brain to get bored. If your brain is bored, it's more creative. When your brain is occupied, it's useless. So leave the phone, go take a walk in the garden, and just stand there. Your brain will say, hey man, you might be missing an important call. Like, nope, I gotta watch, it'll tell me. And you keep having that thing until you bring your brain to submission to a point where it's forced to create. Ultimately, a lot of us create for that reason, because at some point we got bored and we're like, yo man, let me see what I can make. And then you made it. So get bored, go out into the garden and then figure this piece of music out, figure it out and see it from 2 years ahead. Because ultimately, when you make a film, what you make now, people will only experience in about a year or two's time. So whatever you're making can't be dated. It can't sound like 2024. It actually has to sound like 2026. And you have to sometimes compose from that perspective and like, in 2 years, what's going to be the thing that's going to make sense? If it's not working, whatever you're doing is not working. It's because you actually don't know it. You need to stop, go out and be okay with starting over and figure it out somewhere else so that when you come back, you're just creating what's already there. And that's why having a phone is like probably the biggest improvement to our processes, because back then you had to try and remember this thing until you got home, and it would you were hoping not to forget it, and 9 out of 10 times you would, because inspiration is slippery. It will come and then off a lot of the time. So now you can just take it and just beatbox the idea and then speak through parts. This is the bass, do, 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 whatever. This is this part, and this is the drum pattern. And then pause, and then you can relax. You know how to recreate that when you get back home, and then you build on from there. Question 2, the difference between documentaries and film. In narrative films, the music most of the time can be a character. Right? It's its own character. It plays a very functional role. It plays as a reminder. When we hear that piano piece, we know who this scene is influenced by, or who's the dominant factor in the scene, or we are heightening the action here, or we're doing whatever the case may be. In documentaries, you're doing a lot less than that. Documentaries end up becoming more background music because you just like letting the audience know that here there's a lot of moving parts. Pay attention. Pay attention to the details because they're going to come up later, and really keeping the tension going. This is a serious documentary. At no point should you feel at ease or feel like you should be smiling or laughing. This is not that type of party, and that's what the music does there. So it plays a more backseat version than it does in narrative film. Narrative film, there are times when it will really be pushed forward, and now the music is like, it's like big now. This is happening, whatever it is. And then in documentaries, it's not supposed to do that too much because 99% of a documentary is dialogue. Just dialogue from start to finish. And already that tells you that you are 5 decibels behind. So you're just there at the bottom, just doing that. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be exceptional. I love BBC documentaries. 9 out of 10 times I can't remember the music. And it's beautiful. When you listen to it on its own, it's beautiful, but it's not meant to be remembered. It's just meant to play a deeper supportive role than the other one, than narrative. Yes.
How do you know when the music you make reaches that exceptional level? Does it depend on like the number of hours you spend making it, or certain feeling or emotion, or how layered it is, or how do you know?
It's honesty. Some people suck because they're so good at lying to themselves. They're so good at lying to themselves because they want to be comfortable and they want this thing to be easy, and they just really just want to get there so badly. They'll make themselves really believe that what they've done is nice. And you know, man, you feel it, that this is whack. It's not good. And people like to live in that space of comfort because you know what? Anything that's not comfortable is just, it's draining. It's hard, man. You know, when you have to deal with the fact that, look, hey, you know what? I've got a fucking bad temper. And being honest with that and knowing that means that you have to work on it. And the same thing applies with music. You just have to be honest and listen to it. And 9 out of 10 times when you're hearing it, when you're listening to it, is it moving you? Is it really making you want to cry? If it doesn't make you want to cry, how do you expect it to make somebody else cry? Let's be honest. If it doesn't do that to you, and I think you have to, it's also an expression of self-love. Because when you love yourself, you'll be exceptional. You'll give yourself the best. You will. You want the best. You want that car. You want the best for yourself. So if you want the best music, you have to go above and beyond to give yourself the best. And you'll know it's the best because you'll start crying. If you don't cry, forget about it. That's how you know. Save it, file, new, and then open in blank slate and start over. You still have the other one. Actually, if you really want to play with the big boys, delete that one. Let it go, throw it away, and start over. That will push you to like, I don't want to delete this next one, because, you know. But the only way to be exceptional is you have to be able to be honest with yourself and say that honestly to yourself and follow through. Be accountable for being whack. Just be accountable for it by deleting and starting over and doing the work to become exceptional. That's it.
Like, I'd love to know what inspired you to become a film composer, because most of the composers I know are white, you know, Hans Zimmer, Philip Miller, you mentioned Ludwig. Yeah. I don't know many black film composers. Quincy Jones is one, yes. I know Mudia Shole, South African local, is another one. So who or what inspired you?
My love for film is what made me gravitate towards film composing. And also, wanting to make music and trying to find a way to do it without being famous. I really don't want anyone to know me. Like, I'm so happy living in the dark. If I get $600 billion tomorrow, I'm going to be Batman. You'll know Batman. You won't know me. I'll be so happy being at the back. One, but most importantly, it's my love for film. I love film that much to a point where now I've naturally evolved to becoming a director. So now I want to shoot the films that I want to score. The creative space also that film scoring gives you. When a lot of the times when we make music, we make an 8-bar loop. We all know it. There's that 8 bars that sits there and you just stack all the instruments that goes and goes and goes and goes. And then ultimately when you've had enough, you start spreading it across, delete, and start adding, remove, delete. That's the process. And that's what it ends up being. And then you creatively come up with the lyrics and stuff. And that's what it becomes. That's a song. Whereas film scoring can start with 4 bars, change tempo and become 8 of whatever, change tempo and become something that doesn't even have a tempo, become something else, and it's constantly changing. And I think maybe psychologically it's me getting bored very easily with things now. Like sometimes I hear a track, I can't get past the 1.5 minute mark. It's like, okay, so I've heard the whole track.
You say you don't want to be famous, but in my mind, I feel like you have to reach a certain level of fame in order to make a full-time living from composing. I might be wrong.
What's the link between fame and full-time living?
In my mind, the more famous you are, the more opportunities you get to make more money.
Okay, so fame in 2 places. I could be popular in my field with the people that I work with. So I'm popular to the directors and producers, but not famous in the world. And the people in the world aren't the ones that are paying you. They're not the ones hiring you. They're not even the ones asking that, can this film please have Zethu Mashika? No, they're not. You're popular in your space. That's where you need. Now, that's not fame. There's a difference between popularity and fame, which is why they're different words.
Because the world is changing, what's your opinion on AI as an assistant?
AI can't technically be creative. It's always going to be based on stuff that it was trained on. And it's always going to be mimicking something new. So to use it as an assistant, I use AI right now to change my voice into a girl's voice. So I will sing the parts out, and then I run it through an AI that will just change the voice into a girl's voice, but it keeps the cadence, the words, and everything the same. Everything stays the same. It's just now a girl's voice. That's all. That's the main thing. And the only other thing I would use it for is if I'm prompting sounds that don't exist. Like there's something called fader, where you type in and say, I want a synth sound that's low and heavy and very grungy and whatnot. Then it gives you 5 examples of sounds that could only exist in that moment. Then you're not taking it from like Omnisphere. It's a unique sound. Then you can use that sound, things like that. But things that are creating music for you, I shy away from those. I only use it for like that. It's just going to change my voice into this. I mean, I use AI in my short film that I just finished. One of the characters is an old lady who's about 60 something. And the person whose voice it sounded like in my head was Naledi Pandor. So I found an interview on SMWX, took her parts, cut them out, then ran that through AI, trained it. And then I recorded myself performing her lines and then changed it to Naledi Pandor's voice. And that's the kind of stuff I would use it for. I think the people who use AI are going to get more ahead than the people who don't. But also how you use it matters. Sebenza, 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 sebenza,